In Chapter 5, Key Issue 4, we're going to focus on why do people try to preserve local languages. So we'll talk about how countries can peacefully embrace more than one language, and in our next unit we'll talk about how sometimes they don't. We'll talk about what is an isolated language, what's an extinct language, and we'll look at Celtic language as an example of an endangered language. What's a lingua franca, and how is English diffused to other languages? And right now, what's the role of Spanish and French in North America, and how is that changing the language future? So language diversity means that because of the huge number of languages, right, over almost 7,000 languages spoken on the planet Earth, it means that there can be difficulties that arise at the boundary where two languages are spoken. And there are varying degrees of difficulties. And so this chapter will talk about a few of them, and this will come to play again when we start Unit 4, the political geography chapter, and we talk about different ethnic conflicts. But this is a good preview. So one example is in Belgium. In Belgium, it's pretty clearly divided between the south and the north. So southern Belgians speak French, and northern Belgians speak Flemish. And the pressure from the Flemish speakers led to the division of Belgium into two independent regions. And each region controls its own cultural affairs, its own public health, road construction, and urban development. So you can see that Belgium has just been kind of divided into two regions within the same nation, and Flanders and Wallonia, each of them kind of control their own cultural procedures. So the signs for roads might be different. You might find them printed in both languages, or you might find them only printed in Flemish or French, depending on what part of Belgium you're in. And then you will see some subsets of places who speak subsets of languages. So you've got areas where people might speak German. This area right here is a bilingual area of the country. So you have to be able to speak both languages in this area here near the capital. And you can see that there's a few protected minorities who might speak different languages. So you've got Germans in Wallonia, the Flemings, and the Walloons. In Switzerland doesn't have much of a problem. Switzerland has 4 official languages: German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Most people speak multiple languages in Switzerland. In addition to these 4 official languages, many people speak English because of the amount of international banking and business conducted in Switzerland. And Switzerland says that its success is attributed to its decentralized government. So they have a federal government system like the United States. So local authorities hold most of the power, and decisions are made in a local level. And so within each, local area of government, people can vote in their own language, speak in their own language, and can decide how to put signs up. And so this decentralized government means that it doesn't matter what language you speak in different areas of Switzerland. So Switzerland is a small country with multiple languages being spoken in it, and it's kind of a cool exception. So in this region of Switzerland, you're most likely to speak French, and then German in this area, Italian in this area, and Romansh in this area. And as you can see, signs are put up in many different languages. So they're talking about like your hiking ability here, and they talk about, so they've got the signs about hiking in 4 different languages. Isolated languages are when a language is unrelated to any other language in its area, or any other in the world, and so it's not attached to any language family. And this can happen because of usually lack of interaction with speakers of other languages. And a prime example of this, at least in Europe, is the Basque language. So when we were looking at the maps earlier about the spread of the Indo-European language in Europe, you might have noticed there was a small area near the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France that was gray. It was gray because that's where people speak the Basque language. This language predates the arrival of the Indo-European speakers. So whether they came as farmers from the Anatolian hearth or as conquering, warriors from the grass steppes in Asia, the Kugan hearth, the Basque language predates both. It's not related to any other Indo-European language. It's unique. And it's not just the language of Basque that would be unique. They have cultural traditions that are unique. And it's the first language of over 600,000 people in the Pyrenees Mountains. Because they live in the mountains, that mountain would have served as a natural barrier to diffusion. So we know that mountains can serve as a barrier between different folk cultures, like we talked about in chapter 4. And we know that mountain chains can act as barriers against migration. So this mountain kind of led them to be isolated, and it's led to the Basque language, extending, thousands and thousands of years beyond any other language in Europe. Another example of an isolated language might be Icelandic. So Icelandic is part of the Germanic language branch of the Indo-European language family. So it's related to other languages, but it's like the purest form of the Germanic language. So it's changed the least. It's been influenced the least by other like trade routes and migration, because Iceland is the furthest away from the rest of Europe. It's a small island country just south of Greenland. It didn't have as much interaction with the rest of Europe, and so its language has stayed closer to what like you could find like a Proto-German language, like what was German like 10,000 years ago. You would look at like Iceland. Probably like 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, though, not 10. An extinct language is one that's no longer spoken or read in daily activities by anyone in the world. So there are 473 languages that are classified as nearly extinct, and hundreds of extinct languages that we don't even know about have gone extinct. Today we have, so these nearly extinct languages are endangered languages, right? So we have 46 endangered or nearly extinct languages in Africa, 182 in North and South America, 84 in Asia, 9 in Europe, and 152 in the Pacific Islands. Because each of those islands in the Pacific Islands speak one language or more than one language, and they're dying out. So in the United States, Native Americans, we have 74 extinct languages that we know of that were spoken by Native Americans. And in fact, the history of American anthropology had to do with these languages going extinct and these cultures going extinct. And so as anthropology was formed in the United States and started branching off differently from the anthropology that was studied in Europe, we really focused originally as anthropologists in the United States on collecting information about religion, cultures, the language of the Native American tribes as they were dying out and their languages were being replaced. And so our anthropology history in the United States is really one of a salvage mission, like trying to preserve as much as we could about these cultures that we had wiped out. How do we save an endangered language, and why do we care? Hundreds of languages will be extinct during the 21st century. There's only about 300 languages that are considered to be safe from extinction, and these are languages that are spoken by millions of people. Because of globalization, it puts things like language at risk. So these languages that have existed for thousands of years are at greater risk today because of globalization. So again, there's good things to be said about globalization, and there's drawbacks. If you speak a language, your language is part of your cultural identity. Your language ties into sometimes your religion, the historical roots of your country, or your area, your region, your family ties, your ethnicity often, sometimes patterns of dress, other patterns of cultural behavior. Imagine if English was outlawed. Like, how would you feel if you're a native English speaker? It would be strange. How do you feel if you speak a language other than English when people make fun of it or talk about that language not being? Why do we? When someone says speak English, and you hear someone speaking a language that you also speak, how does that make you feel? I don't speak another language fluently, but when I hear someone speaking another language, what I think is, wow, that person speaks one more language than I do. When I hear someone speaking with an accent or having trouble with English, I think that person speaks English better than I speak their language, and I think it's impressive. But think about how important your words are, how important is your ability to communicate. That's why people want to save languages. In the UK, the Celtic language is one of these endangered languages, and it's significant to English speakers because it's only found today in the British Isles, and the Celtic language would have predated the Germanic invaders. And so it's their version of our Native American languages would be these Celtic languages. Today, people speak the Celtic language in remote parts of Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and on the Brittany Peninsula of France. And they work hard to preserve their language in the face of global diffusion. And they're fighting the battle against English, really, with people who have greater political and economic strength. And we'll talk more about Celtic language in Chapter 7. The global dominance of English as a lingua franca, it's a language of international communication. So lingua franca means the language of international communication, and today it's English. English is the first language of over 328 million people and is spoken fluently by another half to 1 billion people. It's the official language in 57 countries. And it's not the official language in the United States, technically, legally, so that could make it 58. People in smaller countries learn English to participate in the global economy and the global culture. And so if you right now are going to business school in a different country, you would learn English because you want to be able to communicate in the business world. That doesn't mean that English will always be the dominant language of communication in the business world. And so when people talk about, being afraid of China's growing power, what they're afraid about is losing some of that power of our lingua franca. English is spoken internationally. You could have a lingua franca on less than a global level as well. So if you were in East Africa, there's many languages spoken, but if you wanted to work in business, you would learn Swahili. So Swahili is the official language of Tanzania, and it's widely spoken in East Africa. So if you wanted to go into business or into, into like radio broadcasting or like a TV news anchor, you would learn Swahili. Same thing in South Asia. Hindi is the lingua franca in South Asia. Indonesian in Southeastern Asia. In Russia, in most of Eastern Europe. So if you want to work in business in most of the countries that were part of the USSR, you would learn Russian because that's still the language most commonly used. English is still the dominant language on the internet, but that's starting to kind of fade. So the percentage of English language online users declined from 46% to 27% in 2010. That doesn't mean less people who speak English are using the internet, because we are surely using more. But it just means that more people in more countries who speak more languages are using it. So English isn't dominating almost half of the internet language anymore. We're down to a little over a quarter. So this, again, doesn't say that people who speak English are using the internet less, because everyone's using the internet more, essentially. So what it means is that people in China are using the internet more. And so by 2020, they expect Mandarin to replace English as the most frequently used online language before 2020. And you can see here the online population. And so China, Japan, all these countries have more internet users now than people who speak English. So let's talk about how English can kind of spread throughout the world. So the expansion diffusion of English, again, like the idea of snowballing, right? So expansion or relocation diffusion. Today we have expansion diffusion, so hierarchical stimulus or contagious diffusion. And so we have new vocabulary. So we have new vocabulary words, new spelling, pronunciation. And some of our words are adopted. Things like friend. I'm going to friend you. Like friend wasn't used as a verb when I was in school, and today it universally is. Bromance, right? I believe, was bromance accepted into the dictionary last year? If it wasn't, it should be. It's a good word. So new words are added, and we have words that are fusing with other languages. So things like t-shirt, cowboy, hamburger. These are words that were allowed to diffuse into French. You can see that you have the integration of English words into Spanish, particularly in the United States, and they call that Spanglish. The infusion of English words into French areas is called Franglish. So that's when you're blending these two languages together. In the United States and Canada, in the United States we have Spanish, right? It's emerging as a largely spoken language because of the large-scale immigration from Latin America. And so because of that, we have public notices and government documents and advertisements in Spanish. And we have radio and TV stations that broadcast in Spanish. So in reaction, 30 states have made English the official language. So here are the states that have above 15% of the population speaking Spanish at home. And here in blue are the states that have made English their official language. And except for California, Arizona, and Florida, notice that most of the states that made English their official language didn't really have much to worry about. North and South Dakota, we're talking to you.